Welcome back to Cryptid's Den. It's always a quiet kind of comfort seeing familiar faces return. I hope today has given you more peace than chaos. And if not, maybe this moment can offer a little pause. Let me know where you're watching from. It's those shared stories that keep this space alive. If you haven't yet, feel free to subscribe and join the conversation down below. Your voice matters here. Now, let's get into it. Have you ever seen a footprint 19 inches long, still wet in the mud outside your barn? Claire did. She was 8. Everyone said, bear. But bears don't stand 8 feet tall at the edge of your porch. Just watching. After her parents' divorce, Claire and her little brother were sent to live deep in the Blue Ridge Mountains with a grandmother who never spoke much, but always left food in the barn. Turns out, that wasn't just kindness. The creature's name, if she ever had one, was Dee, raised in secret by Claire's grandmother after her mother was mistaken for a bear and killed in 1974. Evelyn found the infant, bloodied, howling. Evelyn made a choice. We took her mother, she said. So I became hers. Dee wasn't a monster. She saved Claire from drowning. She mourned when Evelyn passed, and every night since she came back, bringing wildflowers, watching, waiting. Now grown, Claire speaks into a mic for Cryptid's Den. She was raised by us, but really we were raised by her. And just as she finishes recording, she sees it. Not Dee, but someone smaller, younger. Still watching from the trees. Maybe Dee never left. Maybe she just found a reason to stay. I saw the print before I saw the house. That's not something you expect to say when you're 12 and freshly dumped at the bottom of a gravel driveway in the middle of the Blue Ridge Mountains. But there it was, sunk deep into the wet mud outside the cow barn. 5 toes, 19 inches long, the edges still glistening like something had just stepped away. Jamie didn't see it right away. He was too busy dragging his suitcase through the weeds, kicking rocks, muttering about how none of this was fair. And it wasn't. Our parents had divorced in a flurry of lawyers and slammed doors, and neither one could handle keeping us full-time. So, we were sent to live with Evelyn. Mama Evelyn to Jamie, just Evelyn to me. Our grandmother, who hadn't been to a city since Reagan was president and still churned her own butter. I dropped my backpack beside the porch and squatted near the print. It was too clean to be old. The shape was unmistakable. Toes. 5. Not like a bear. Not like anything I'd seen before. Evelyn came out with a dish towel in her hands, drying a mason jar like we'd just interrupted her daily ritual of pretending the world outside didn't exist. Probably a bear, she said, barely glancing. We've had a few wandering close this year. They like the feed. But there was something clipped in her voice. Like she'd rehearsed the line. Like she wanted to believe it too. That night, the mountains felt alive. Not in a magical way. In a watching way. The kind that makes your skin twitch even under a quilt. Jamie had fallen asleep with his headphones on, curled around his flashlight like it was a teddy bear. I couldn't sleep. The wind outside kept stalling, then picking up again, like it wasn't wind at all. Then I heard it, a low, guttural sound, somewhere between a growl and a moan. Long, drawn out, not close, not far, but definitely not from any cow. I slipped out of bed, padded to the window, and pulled the curtain an inch aside. The cow barn stood there like a dark ship in the sea of fog. I could just make out the metal latch on the door, swaying gently like someone, or something, had brushed past it. And then, at the edge of the barn's roof, where the moonlight broke against the metal, I saw a figure. Not moving, just standing. Too tall, its head brushed the overhang, its shoulders broad, arms long, not quite human, not quite beast. It didn't flinch, didn't twitch, it just stood there, watching the side of the house like it remembered something that had been taken from it. I dropped the curtain. My heart kicked against my ribs like it was trying to escape. I wanted to scream, but nothing came out, just my breath. sharp and useless. The next morning, Jamie and I were feeding the chickens when he called me over. "Look," he said, pointing at the fence. A clump of dark, tangled hair was stuck in the wire, caught on a splintered edge like something brushed through in a hurry. It was longer than any dog's fur, rough, and smelled faintly of wet moss and pine. Evelyn came over, saw what we were holding, and froze. Just for a second. Then she blinked, took it from Jamie's hand, and tossed it into the burn barrel without a word. Her silence felt louder than any explanation. We ate breakfast in quiet. Jamie kept looking at me like he wanted to say something but didn't know how. I didn't know either. I just kept hearing the creak of that barn door, the sound of breathing in the wind, the way the figure had stood so still, like it was waiting for something. Or someone. Evelyn finally spoke, eyes on her coffee. "There are things in these woods you don't go chasing after. You see something? Fine. But don't go looking. Not everything wants to be found." She didn't say it like a warning. She said it like a rule. That afternoon, Jamie asked if we could sleep with the light on. He didn't say why. I didn't ask. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering what kind of world I'd just stepped into. The mountains used to be stories, places you read about, backgrounds and postcards. But now, they were breathing around me, watching through the trees, and I couldn't help but feel like someone, and maybe, just maybe, it hadn't decided what to do with us yet. They say monsters live in the woods, but that day, the only thing I felt out there was the cold, and then her warmth. It started like any other late morning on the ridge, with that weird quiet that presses into your chest more than your ears. Jamie was inside with Evelyn, probably peeling apples or pestering her about old war stories. I just needed air. I told myself I was going for a walk. Nothing serious. Just to breathe. I didn't even tell them I was heading toward the river. Maybe I didn't know it myself until my feet were already crunching through the frost-laced brush, and the distant sound of water was humming beneath the stillness. The river wasn't far. Just beyond the back pasture. Past the blackberry bramble, and a broken split-rail fence that sagged like it had given up, trying to keep anything in or out. I followed deer trails, stepped over logs slick with moss, and finally stood at the bank, the water rushing faster than I remembered from summers past. The current shimmered, silver and brown, and there was a curl of mist lifting off the surface that made the trees on the other side look further away than they really were. I don't know why I stepped down onto the rocks. They were wet, half frozen, and I knew better. But something pulled me, not like a voice or a feeling, more like gravity but sideways, like I was supposed to see something, or be seen. My boot slid, my leg twisted, my knee slammed a stone, and I tumbled in, the river swallowing me before I had time to scream. It was instant. The shock of the cold. I couldn't think. The water wrapped around my chest like iron. I kicked, but the rocks underneath snagged my ankle. My jacket ballooned with water and dragged me under. I remember the light, filtered and green, twisting with bubbles. I remember the pressure behind my eyes. I remember reaching for something, anything, and finding only the dark. Then there were arms. Huge. Covered in wet hair, solid as tree trunks. They didn't grab me. They didn't yank or tear. They lifted me. The river disappeared. Air hit my face like a slap. I gasped, coughed, sobbed. My foot throbbed like it had been crushed. I blinked up, vision half-blurred with tears and silt, and saw her. She knelt beside me, her head tilted just slightly, as if trying to understand what I was. The fur on her arms was matted, dripping, but I could feel the heat radiating off her. She smelled like crushed leaves and smoke. Her face, God, her face wasn't what I expected. It was broad, yes, and wild-looking, but not monstrous. Her eyes were black, glossy, deep-set, not hollow, not angry, but full of something that felt like mourning. She made a sound. barely a whisper, not quite human. Then another, softer. I thought she was crying. She placed something under my head, a folded cloth, rue and worn like an old dish towel. Then she touched my foot. I tensed, ready to scream, but her fingers, massive, thick, moved so gently it felt like a mother checking a bruise. She grunted softly, looked back toward the woods, then back to me. I blinked again, and she was gone. When I came to, I was on the porch swing wrapped in Evelyn's old patchwork quilt. My hair was damp, the edges of my socks still soaked, but I wasn't shivering anymore. A steaming mug of peppermint tea rested beside me, untouched. Evelyn sat in the rocking chair, arms crossed, eyes somewhere past the horizon. "You were lucky," she said without looking at me. "That river's taken bigger folks than you." I tried to speak, but my voice cracked. "She pulled me out," I said. "I saw her. Evelyn rocked once. Twice. I know." I turned to face her, heart thumping. What was she? She took a long breath and let it go like she'd been holding it since the morning I was born. "She's still watching," Evelyn murmured. "Be grateful. But don't ever go looking." I didn't know what to say. My throat tightened again, but not from fear. From something else. I looked out toward the edge of the trees and imagined those eyes, waiting, hiding, still wet with tears. That night, I drew her. It wasn't a perfect likeness. I didn't have the right colors, or the memory for every detail. But I captured her eyes. That was the part I couldn't forget. Big and round, almost glassy. Sad in a way that made my chest hurt. Like she knew something I didn't. Like she'd carried that pain a long time. I taped the sketch to the inside cover of my journal and wrote below it. She wasn't a monster. She was mourning. I didn't tell Jamie. I didn't tell Evelyn again either. But I started watching the woods differently, like someone looking not for shadows, but for something that might be watching back, quietly, patiently, with eyes that had seen too much. And from that day forward, no matter how far I wandered on that ridge, I never felt alone again. By the time I turned 14, the woods around Evelyn's farm no longer felt like a mystery. They felt like a question I wasn't allowed to ask out loud, but the silence didn't stop me from watching. I started to notice the little things. How Evelyn never threw scraps into the compost like she used to. How every evening, just before dusk, she'd slip outside with a basket and disappear behind the barn for 10, maybe 15 minutes. No flashlight, no coat, even on the colder nights. Just that basket. Heavy enough to weigh down one arm, but light enough to carry with purpose. I waited until the second week of October to follow her. The sky had that orange-blue tint it gets right before everything sinks into gray. And Jamie was inside doing math homework at the kitchen table, muttering to himself and flipping pages loud enough to make sure we all knew he was suffering. Evelyn stepped out the back door at the usual time, humming something under her breath I couldn't place. She didn't look behind her, didn't lock the door, just walked barefoot across the yard, basket swinging gently at her side. I slipped on my jacket and followed, sticking to the shadows. She moved faster than I expected, like she knew every route and rut by heart, like her feet were guided by something older than memory. I stayed 10 paces behind, just far enough not to snap a twig too loud or brush up against dry cornstalks that rattled in the wind. She didn't go into the barn. She went around it, to the lean-to on the far side, where we used to store firewood before the roof caved in. She stopped at the door, crouched, and set the basket down like it was an offering. Then she stood back, hands clasped in front of her, eyes low. Something moved inside. At first, I thought it was just shadows shifting. But then it stepped forward. She stepped forward. I didn't breathe. She was taller than I remembered, broader too. Her hair looked darker now, more matted, with bits of grass and twigs caught in it like she'd walked straight through the earth. She reached out, 2 long arms, hands nearly human, and took the basket in both. For a moment, she just stood there, holding it. Then she looked up and bowed her head. Evelyn did the same. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. I stumbled back, my heel catching a loose rock, and I bit down on a yelp that rose up too fast. By the time I got home, my hands were shaking so hard I could barely turn the doorknob. Evelyn didn't mention it that night. She didn't have to. I sat across from her at dinner and felt the weight of something shifting between us. A door cracking open. She came to me after Jamie had gone to bed. The house was dark except for the lamp in the hallway. She didn't knock, just leaned in the doorway with her arms crossed and her voice low. "I suppose you saw." I nodded. She came in, sat on the edge of my bed, and looked like she had aged 20 years in a single breath. "I need you to listen close," she said, "and I need you to believe what I tell you, even if it sounds like something out of the weekly world news." She started with the winter of 1974. Papa had been out checking the property lines, rifle slung over his back, like he always did when the coyotes got too bold. It was snowing that day, light but steady. He saw something move near the edge of the tree line. Big, low to the ground, shaggy. He thought it was a bear, maybe a mother bear, protecting a den. He raised the gun. He didn't hesitate. He just fired. When he got closer, he realized he'd made a mistake. It wasn't a bear. It was something upright, bleeding, curling over itself in the snow, trying to protect what was behind it. That's when he heard the crying. Not human, not quite animal either. A thin, desperate wail. He found the baby beside the body, coiled up, covered in its mother's blood, shivering so hard it couldn't even lift its head. Papa wrapped it in his coat. He didn't tell anyone what he'd done. He just brought her home. They kept her hidden in the barn, fed her milk warmed on the stove, laid blankets on the hay, and talked to her in whispers. She didn't speak, not like us, but she learned faces, gestures. She listened. They called her Dee. She grew fast, Evelyn said, eyes far away. By the time you were born, she was already 7 feet tall. We didn't know what to do, so we just kept going. We fed her. We taught her things, and she stayed. Her voice cracked. "When Franklin died in 88, she whispered. She screamed. All night. Like something inside her had broken loose. I sat frozen, hands balled up in my lap, heart pounding like a drum inside my ribs. Evelyn didn't look at me. "We took her mother," she said. "So, I tried to become hers." Then she stood, smoothed the blanket on my bed, and walked out without another word. I didn't sleep. I couldn't stop picturing that moment. Dee stepping out of the shadows, bowing her head, holding that basket like it meant something sacred. And I realized, for the first time, that we weren't just guests on this land. We were living alongside something older. Something hurt. Something that never asked to be part of us, but had stayed anyway. Something that still carried the grief of a mother we stole. We started seeing her more after the truth came out, not up close, not like that night in the barn, but from a distance, through rows of corn, behind the garden shed, in the shimmer of heat rising off the fields. Sometimes at dawn I'd catch a glimpse of her walking slowly between the stalks, almost weightless, like the ground barely noticed her footsteps. Jamie said it felt like a ghost was watching us harvest. I told him to hush, but part of me knew he was right. She was everywhere and nowhere all at once. Always just far enough to wonder if we'd imagined it. Then came the goat. It was Jamie's favorite, brown and white with a crooked ear he named Lucky. Evelyn found him early one morning, lying behind the barn with his neck twisted and blood pooled beneath him. No signs of struggle, no tracks we could follow. Just a clean break in silence. Jamie went still, eyes locked on the body like he couldn't make sense of it. "It was her," he muttered. "It had to be her." I didn't say anything. I wanted to defend her. I wanted to scream that she wasn't some mindless thing wandering in from the woods. But I had no proof. Just a gut feeling and a memory of being pulled from water by something warm and trembling. That night, I sat on the porch while Jamie paced inside, muttering about traps and trail cams, and what Evelyn would or wouldn't let him do. The sky had already gone purple-blue, and the wind moved through the corn like a whisper in a language I didn't speak. I stayed still, trying to catch it. And then I saw her, at the edge of the field, crouched low, not running, but moving with intent. She was carrying something bundled in her arms. Her hair looked darker than before, soaked in shadow, and her movements were slower, more deliberate. She disappeared behind the shed and didn't come back. I followed her trail at first light. Jamie was still asleep, and Evelyn hadn't come down yet. The ground was soft from overnight rain, and I could see where her footprints had pressed deep into the mud. Too wide to be human, too long to be anything else. They led me behind the shed and down toward the dry creek bed, now littered with leaves and broken sticks. That's where I found the shallow grave. It wasn't even a grave, really. More like a small indentation in the earth, covered with stones and a few wildflowers. The kind Evelyn used to grow before the deer got to them. The goat's body was gone, but its collar was there, half buried. I knelt down and traced the stones with my fingers. They weren't random. They were arranged in a kind of spiral, delicate and strange, almost ceremonial. I didn't tell Jamie. Back at the house, Evelyn already knew. I didn't have to explain. She was standing by the window, her hand on the curtain, her face drawn tight. "She doesn't understand," Evelyn said softly. "Not the way we do. Life, death, rules. She is part wild, part child, raised by people but never really one of us." I sat with that for a while, trying to swallow it whole. The image of her digging that small grave wouldn't leave me. The way she'd hunched her shoulders like she was protecting something. The way she'd looked around, not out of fear, but out of grief. That night I went to the barn alone. The moon was high, casting a silver glow across the roof. The wind had died down, and the only sound was the creak of wood as I leaned against the old barn door. I didn't knock. I didn't open it either. I just stood there and whispered, "I'm not afraid of you." The silence stretched long, thick as fog. I thought maybe she wasn't there. Maybe she'd gone deeper into the woods to be alone again. Then the floorboards creaked. Soft, slow steps inside. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. After a minute, I turned and walked back to the house. I left the porch light on. The next morning, a bundle of wildflowers sat on the front steps. No note, no basket. Just bound together with a piece of knotted twine. Too careful to be windblown, too deliberate to be coincidence. I picked them up and held them to my chest. Evelyn watched from the kitchen window. She didn't say a word. She just smiled, faintly, like someone who'd seen that same bouquet once before, a long time ago. We didn't speak about it at breakfast. Jamie had already moved on to some story he'd read in a hunting magazine. Something about trail cameras catching strange figures at night. I let him talk. I let him believe in the wild version of the world, because maybe that made more sense than the truth. But I knew. I knew she hadn't killed out of hunger. She had buried that goat the way people bury something they feel responsible for, carefully, quietly, with flowers and reverence. And for the first time since Evelyn told me who she was, I started to think Dee wasn't just surviving out there. She was trying to learn, trying to belong, and maybe, in her own way, she was grieving just as much as we were. Only no one ever taught her what to do with that kind of sorrow. The winter came earlier than usual that year, pressing into the mountains like a breath held too long. The cold didn't just settle in the air. It sunk into the bones of the house, into the walls, into Evelyn's voice. She'd been quiet for weeks, but I thought it was just the usual fatigue she tried to hide. Until the morning, I found her sitting in the rocker by the stove, her tea untouched, her hands clasped too still in her lap. The doctor's letter was folded once, tight and creased, resting on the table like a weight too heavy to move. She didn't look up when I picked it up. She just said, "There's a name for it. But it doesn't really matter now. That afternoon, we sat on the back steps, coats zipped up tight, steam curling from our mugs. Jamie was off sledding down the back hill, yelling into the wind like he could scare the winter back into the trees. I didn't ask questions. I just waited, and eventually Evelyn said, "If I don't make it through this season, you'll have to watch out for her. She won't understand. She doesn't know how to be alone." I remember staring out at the woods, every tree a question mark. "Do you think she knows?" I asked. Evelyn nodded slowly. "She knows more than we give her credit for. She just doesn't have the words to tell us." The next time Dee came close, it wasn't at night. It wasn't a glimpse through corn or a shadow behind the shed. It was just before sunset, the sky bruised with purple, the light soft enough to make everything feel like a memory. Evelyn was standing near the tree line, breath rising in steady clouds. I was at the window, half hidden by the curtain. Dee stepped out, slow, careful, like the air itself might shatter around her. She was thinner than I remembered, her hair tangled with dry leaves, her eyes darker somehow. She stopped a few feet from Evelyn and lowered her head, arms slack at her sides. Evelyn didn't move at first. Then, after a long moment, she stepped forward and reached out. Not to touch her, not quite, but to offer her hand. Dee looked down, then raised her own, wide and rough and shaking. Their hands met, not in a handshake, not in a grasp. Just the soft press of palm to palm. No words, no sound. Just the quiet hum of something ancient and tender passing between them. Later that night, Evelyn came into my room and sat on the edge of my bed. Her breath was slow. Her hands, thinner now, trembled a little as she picked at the hem of her sleeve. "She's been through things I never had the courage to ask about," she whispered. "But I know the signs. She was pregnant once. I could tell." My chest went tight. I didn't know what to say. "She carried heavy, slow?" Evelyn continued. "Built nests in the woods. She was different, softer. Then one night she howled, louder than I've ever heard. Ran into the woods, screamed for hours. Days passed. I thought she'd died." She paused, swallowed. Her eyes were glassy now. 3 weeks later, she came back. Skin hung off her bones. No baby. Nothing but silence. I've never seen her cry again. Not like that. I reached over, took her hand. It felt like paper against mine. "She buried it somewhere," she said. "Somewhere deep enough not even time could find it." We didn't speak after that. Not that night, not the next. But something had changed. The way Evelyn moved slower, held her tea longer. The way she looked out the window with eyes that seemed to be saying goodbye before her mouth could form the words. Jamie still didn't know. I didn't think he could have understood it then. Not the way she wanted to be remembered. Not just as our grandmother, but as someone who gave her last years to something wild and wounded and halfway between child and myth. A week later, I found a new bundle on the porch. A blanket, folded neatly, rough but clean, and inside it, a small clay figure. 2 hands cupped together, sculpted like they were holding something invisible. I ran my fingers over it. No name, no markings, just a weight of intention. I didn't show Evelyn. I didn't need to. That night, I sat with her as she drifted off in the chair, the firelight flickering across her cheeks. I thought about Dee, somewhere in the trees, watching us through the cold, remembering the woman who raised her, fed her, taught her to grieve without breaking the world in half. When Evelyn's breathing grew shallow, when the room filled with the kind of quiet that doesn't leave, I held her hand the same way she once held Dee's. Not to keep her here, just to let her know she didn't have to go alone. Outside, I swore I heard something move through the brush. Gentle, slow, reverent. A sound like breath caught in the wind, or maybe just the trees remembering her name. And in that moment, I understood what a mother gives. Not just life, not just love, but the shape of how to carry sorrow without turning it into anger. The language of silence. The choice to stay, even when no one else understands why. The night Evelyn passed, it was snowing. Not a gentle dusting like in the postcards, but a slow, silent falling that seemed to erase the world one flake at a time. I sat with her until her breathing thinned to nothing. Her hands still tucked in mine. The skin papery, her fingers curled like she was holding on to something only she could see. Jamie stayed in his room. I don't think he wanted to believe the silence meant anything more than another night without power. Another fire gone out. I didn't tell him right away. I couldn't. The next morning, the porch was covered in powder so soft it looked untouched. But I saw them. Tracks. Wide, deep, fresh. They led from the tree line to the back window, and then vanished again into the woods. Jamie saw them too. He turned to me, face white with fear, and said, "She's still coming here, like it was a crime. She's grieving," I said. "Just like us." He shook his head. "She's not one of us." But I remembered Evelyn's voice, raspy but steady, that last week by the fire. As long as she still comes around, there's still something good left in these hills. After the funeral, people offered casseroles and pitiful looks. None of them asked about Dee. None of them knew. Jamie withdrew. He wanted to call the game warden. Wanted to report something. He said it felt wrong. Letting a wild thing roam so close. I didn't answer him. I couldn't. Because nothing about her had ever felt wild to me. Broken, maybe. Lost, but not dangerous. That week I opened the notebook Evelyn left me. It wasn't a journal. It was something more delicate. A record, maybe. Observations. Sketches of Dee's hand. Markings on tree bark. Symbols that looked half-written, half-remembered. In the margins were dates, moments I now recognized. The night of the goat. The time I fell into the river. The first time Evelyn saw her walk upright. Every page was careful, not scientific, but sacred. I started leaving things out at the barn again. Not offerings, not really, just signals. A scarf, a box of old matches, a copy of one of my drawings of her, folded neatly into a mason jar lid. Every morning they were gone, not taken in a hurry, taken with intention. And every morning in a place something waited, a smooth stone with grooves I didn't carve, a bundle of winter berries tied with sinew, a feather tucked into a bent horseshoe. Nothing loud. Nothing to prove anything. Just a rhythm, a back and forth of unspoken understanding. One night, I woke up to the sound of the porch boards creaking. I didn't get up. I didn't need to. I lay there and imagined her sitting outside, her massive shape hunched beneath the overhang, watching the snow fall. I imagined her eyes, black and unreadable, trained on the window like they were trying to reach me through glass. I didn't feel fear. Just the weight of presence. Jamie moved out in March. Said he couldn't stand the quiet anymore. Said I'd let grief turn me into someone who talked to shadows. I didn't argue. I helped him pack. We hugged once, stiff and unfinished. As he pulled out of the driveway, he paused, stared out at the trees, and muttered, "I hope she never comes back." But she did. The next day, and the next, I started writing letters I never sent. Short ones. Half-page, just words I thought she might understand, folded and placed under a rock beside the shed. Sometimes I'd find the rock moved. Sometimes not. It didn't matter. The point wasn't whether she read them. The point was that I kept speaking. Spring came late that year. The trees took longer to bud, and the night stayed sharp with frost even into April. But there was a stillness to it, a softness I hadn't felt in months. One morning, I walked to the edge of the woods and stood there, not calling her name, not trying to summon anything. I just stood and waited. And in the distance, half covered by brush, I saw her. She didn't step forward, didn't lift a hand. She just stood there, the sun dappling her shoulders, her hair wild and thick, her shape unmistakable. She tilted her head slightly, like she was listening. Then she turned and walked back into the trees. I stayed until the wind changed. That night I lit a candle and set it by the window. I left Evelyn's notebook open on the table. I made stew and left a bowl, still warm, on the porch. And I whispered a promise, not just to her, but to the space she'd carved into our lives. Whatever this was, it didn't end with Evelyn. And it didn't end with Dee, either. I didn't know what to call it. Maybe it was a vow. Maybe it was penance. Or maybe it was just the simple act of choosing to care for something no one else could see. But I knew this much. As long as she still walked this land, as long as the snow caught in the hollows of her footprints, as long as the trees bent a little when she passed, then the world still held a trace of kindness, a shape that grief couldn't erase, a heartbeat in the silence, a promise that I had to keep. It started with a knock that never came, just a silence at the door, heavy enough to stir something in my chest. I opened it slowly and found nothing but the wind and a line of stones. 12 small, smooth ones laid in an arc along the edge of the porch, not scattered, placed. Each one pale gray, still cold from the night. I didn't touch them. I just stood there for a while, the morning light crawling across the hills behind me, knowing what they meant before I let myself say it. She wanted me to follow. The forest beyond the fields didn't feel the same anymore. Since Evelyn passed, the trees had grown quieter, like even the birds had been holding their breath. I stepped past the barbed fence, followed the bend of the dry creek, moved through underbrush that had once scratched at my legs, but now seemed to part from me. The stones kept going, scattered wider now, marking the trail not with direction but with invitation. And then I saw her. She was waiting at the top of a slope, standing half in shadow, half in the brittle light filtering through bare branches. She didn't move, just watched me the way someone might look at an old photograph. Familiar, waited. I took a breath and stepped forward. She turned and slipped between the trees like smoke through cracks. I followed. The trail narrowed. The air thickened. We moved deeper than I'd ever dared go alone. Time bent there. Light was strange. My boots crunched across a floor of pine needles and bone-dry leaves, but her footsteps made no sound. We climbed a ridge, curved around a limestone outcrop, and dropped into a hollow veiled in mist. That's when I saw it, her place. The mouth of the cave was framed by overgrown vines, but cleared enough to show it was used. Inside, the air shifted with an odd warmth, like breath trapped in stone. I followed her in, heartbeat tangled in my throat. The walls were smooth, etched faintly with patterns, spirals, dots, something that looked like claw marks softened by time. In the center of the chamber lay a ring of river stones, each one blackened by ash. Bones. Small. Animal. Arranged like they had meaning once. And in the far corner, surrounded by dried grasses, feathers, and strips of cloth, was a shallow impression in the dirt. A nest, but not one made for sleep. She walked to it, lowered herself with care, and sat beside it in silence. I stepped closer, every part of me aware that I was standing inside something sacred. She looked up, then down at her chest, and then slowly laid a hand on her stomach. Her palm was broad, fur matted with bits of moss and bark, but steady. Then she turned to the wall beside her, where 3 small indentations marked the stone. Long, narrow, side by side, like the points of massive fingers pressed into clay before it hardened. I knelt down. The air smelled of old earth and cedar. I traced one of the grooves with my fingertip, dust rising into the light. She reached out and touched my shoulder. Not hard, just enough to ground me. Then she leaned in and pulled me into her arms. It wasn't clumsy. It wasn't wild. It was trembling. She held me like someone who had waited too long to be forgiven. And maybe she wasn't even asking for it. Maybe she didn't know what she was holding, only that she needed to. Her chest rose in deep, staggered breaths. I could feel her ribs under the layers of hair and muscle. I closed my eyes and let myself be still. I whispered, "You're not alone anymore." She didn't speak. She never did. But her hand curled around my back with a kind of strength that didn't ask anything in return. And in that cave, surrounded by memory and stone and the echo of what had been lost, I finally understood the weight of the silence she carried. This was not just a refuge. It was a grave, a cradle, a prayer. When I left, she stayed inside. I didn't look back until I reached the tree line. The cave mouth was dark now, hidden again beneath the vines. But I knew she was watching. The sky was shifting by then, smeared in hues of fire and rust. I walked home alone, but not the same. That night I wrote in Evelyn's notebook for the first time since she passed. I didn't write about sightings or sounds. I didn't mark coordinates. I just wrote one sentence across the last blank page. She didn't belong here, but somehow this place belonged to her. I left the notebook open on the kitchen table. In the morning, the wind had turned. Warmer now, soft as breath on skin. Outside, a single red feather rested on the porch steps, tied with a loop of twine, and next to it, 3 stones, smooth and dark, arranged in a line. I didn't touch them. I just stood there, the sun behind me, the woods breathing in the distance, and felt something shift inside me. Like a door had opened and a part of my soul I hadn't known was locked. And for the first time since that long winter began, I let myself believe that maybe she had found her way through the sorrow, not past it, but through it. And maybe I had too. The house looked smaller than I remembered. The porch sagged more. The paint had faded to something closer to bone than white, and the barn leaned a little harder into the wind, like it was tired of holding on to time. But the gate still creaked the same, and the air still smelled like wood smoke and wild mint. Jamie didn't come with me this time. He said he didn't need to. Maybe he was right. Maybe this was something I had to do alone. I parked at the end of the gravel drive and stepped out just as the sun slipped behind the ridge, turning the tree line gold for a breath before it all went blue again. The kind of light that makes shadows stretch twice their size and makes you feel like someone's standing behind you, even when you know they're not. I walked the perimeter first, boots crunching through dry grass. The barn door still hung on its crooked hinge. The trough was overturned, but the ground in front of the barn, mud soft from last night's rain, was marked. Prints. Wide, 5-toed, deep. Still fresh. I followed them with my eyes, not my feet. They curved around the barn, down the slope toward the stream bed, and vanished where the trees began. I didn't need to go further. I knew she was still here. That night, I stayed in my old room. The wallpaper was still peeling in the corners, and the window still groaned when I opened it. I left it cracked. The cold drifted in, and I let it. I sat on the floor with Evelyn's notebook in my lap, and the little recorder Jamie gave me years ago for interviews I never got around to taking. I pressed the red button. The tiny light blinked, steady and expectant, and I started to speak. She was raised by us, but really, we were raised by her. I told the story like I was whispering to Evelyn again. Not the version I'd ever tell the neighbors or the postman or the folks at the diner who used to ask why I never left these hills. I told the story the way you tell it when you know someone might finally believe you. I told them about the print in the mud that first day, and the hands that pulled me from the river, and the way her eyes held sorrow, like it was the only language she knew. I told them about Evelyn's baskets, the quiet exchange in the barn, the screaming after Papa's accident, the grave no one marked but all of us felt. I ended the recording without flourish. Just silence. It felt more honest that way. I sent it to a podcast I'd started listening to when the nights got too long. CRYPTID'S Den. I didn't expect a reply. I didn't need one. The next morning, the food I left on the porch was gone, not eaten there. Taken. A clean napkin folded neatly and placed in the empty dish, and beside it something new. A pine cone, perfectly symmetrical, hollowed in the middle, filled with tiny wildflowers pressed flat between strips of bark. like a message, or maybe just a gift. I walked down to the edge of the woods, not to chase her, not to call her, but to be near. The wind stirred the treetops, and the quiet held that strange fullness again. I leaned against a fence post, still wrapped in rusted wire, and waited. For nothing in particular. For everything all at once. Then I saw it. Not her. Something smaller, just past the first line of trees, nearly still, watching me from behind a trunk with wide, blinking eyes. It wasn't as tall. Its fur was lighter, its frame thinner, its posture not yet learned. But the shape was right, the slope of the brow, the way it gripped the bark, the silence it carried like breath. We stared at each other for what felt like forever, and then, just as I took a step forward, it vanished. I didn't follow. I just stood there, pulse in my ears, knees soft, heart full of something that had no name. Maybe she never really left these woods, or maybe she did, and came back. Or maybe she stayed because she found a reason to. That night I lit a candle in the kitchen window and sat by it until dawn. The wind rattled the old tin roof. The barn creaked. Somewhere out there, something breathed. Not just myth, not just memory, but something real. Something real. Something real. Some kind. Some stories aren't meant to be shouted. They aren't built for bright lights or headlines or dinner table debates. Some stories settle in the quiet corners of the world, unfolding slowly, like fog lifting off the hills at dawn, or the way trees remember the weight of wind long after it's passed. They live where memory and mystery meet, in the space between what we know and what we dare to feel. And when you've stood close enough to something you can't explain, but also can't deny, you stop asking for proof. You start listening for proof. You start listening different. There is something sacred about the connection between the human heart and the unknown. Not because it demands understanding, but because it invites something far more difficult. Humility. Not everything that lives in this world was made for us to conquer, name, or define. Some beings exist in their own rhythm, shaped by silence and sorrow and centuries of watching from the edges. And sometimes, if we're still enough, kind enough, open enough, we're allowed to witness them, not as intruders, not as saviors, but simply as fellow travelers in the ache and grace of being alive. What does it mean to be seen, not just by other people, but by something that isn't bound by our words or expectations? What does it mean to be protected, mourned, remembered by something the world refuses to believe in? Maybe it means that kindness is older than language. That grief is shared even across species. That family isn't always written in blood, but in the promises we keep, in the mercy we offer, in the quiet ways we choose to stay. Because the heart knows what the mind often forgets. We are not alone here. We never have been. So if you've ever felt watched in the stillness, if you've ever caught something in the corner of your eye that vanished when you turned, maybe don't be so quick to doubt it. Maybe what you saw wasn't meant to frighten you. Maybe it was meant to remind you that the wild doesn't always mean danger. Sometimes it means refuge. Thank you for spending your time with this story. If it touched something in you, some memory, some wondering, some part of your soul that's still searching, please consider sharing your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to know what stirred in you as you listened. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, stories that walk the line between myth and memory, be sure to subscribe and follow the channel. Your support keeps these stories alive, one heartbeat at a time.